Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
A group of 5 friends, Lena, Travis, Brooke, Miguel, and Danny, booked a last-minute trip to a secluded beach on the Gulf Coast of Florida. It wasn't on any mainstream tourist map, but Miguel had heard about it through a Reddit thread titled Hidden Paradises You've Never Heard Of. The post had only 2 upvotes, and the comments were mostly bots or deleted users, but that didn't stop them. They were 20-somethings with nothing but time and a thirst for something different. The beach was pristine. No lifeguards, no shops, just an empty shoreline hugging dark, churning waves. It was beautiful in that raw, untouched kind of way. They arrived just before dusk and decided to pitch their tents right on the sand. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a sickly orange glow over the water, Brooke joked that it looked like the ocean was bleeding. That night, they started a bonfire and passed around drinks. Miguel wandered a bit up the beach to pee and came back pale. He said he'd seen a figure standing ankle deep in the water. Not walking, not moving, just standing there, facing the sea. The others teased him about being drunk, but he swore the person had no reflection in the water. They brushed it off as nerves or shadows playing tricks in the moonlight. Around midnight, they heard a low hum, almost like a foghorn, but deeper, almost guttural. The ocean had gone eerily still. Danny, the skeptic of the group, thought it might be a weird current or some underwater cave causing acoustic phenomena. But Lena, who had grown up around the sea, looked uneasy. She said the sound didn't come from the water, it came from underneath it. They decided to sleep it off, thinking maybe they were just psyching themselves out. But at around 3 a.m., Lena woke up screaming. Her feet were soaked, not with water, at least not the kind that belonged in the ocean. It was thick, dark, almost black, and smelled like rotting fish and iron. It was seeping into the tent from underneath. When they unzipped the flap and shone their flashlights outside, they saw that the tide had come in. Only it wasn't water that had reached them. It was this same black sludge, stretching across the sand like veins. Travis stepped out and immediately slipped. The moment his skin touched the sludge, he started convulsing. They pulled him back inside, but the burns on his arms looked like acid burns, blistered, raw, and spreading unnaturally fast. Danny screamed that they needed to leave. Miguel ran toward the car parked a few hundred yards away in a clearing behind the dunes. He never came back. They heard him scream once, not a long, drawn-out cry, just one short, high-pitched shriek that cut off too abruptly. Brooke and Danny tried to go after him, but couldn't see anything. Their flashlights flickered and died, and the stars above seemed to vanish, swallowed by clouds that hadn't been there seconds before. By dawn, Travis was unconscious. His skin was turning a sickly gray color. His eyes rolled back in his head. Lena sat by him, whispering something under her breath, something that didn't sound like English. Brooke and Danny tried to get help, but their phones were dead. The car was gone. Not just moved, gone, as if it had never been there. Brooke spotted footprints leading back to the shore, Miguel's boots unmistakably, but they didn't stop at the water's edge. They walked into the ocean, and they didn't come back out. Around noon, a thick fog rolled in, blinding and suffocating. The air grew heavy, electric. Lena was the next to go. She walked into the water without saying a word, her eyes wide and unfocused. Brooke and Danny screamed after her, but she never turned around. She didn't swim. She just walked in, deeper and deeper, until she vanished. They tried to leave the beach then, running in the direction they thought the road was. But it was all dunes and sand and fog. Every direction looked the same. The more they ran, the louder that hum grew. It was inside their ears, vibrating their bones. Danny started bleeding from his nose. Brooke collapsed. A day later, Brooke was found, naked, delirious, and half buried in the sand several miles from the nearest road. She was dehydrated and covered in salt burns. When the authorities asked her what happened, she said the beach wouldn't let them leave, that it was alive, that something was under it, watching. They never found the others. No footprints, no tents, no car, just the sea. And when people tried to find that beach again, no one could. Satellite maps showed no signs of a shoreline where she claimed they'd been. Locals swore there was nothing but marshes and mangroves out that way. Brooke doesn't talk about it anymore. She moved inland, far from the coast. Every night she sleeps with the sound of white noise playing, terrified of the silence, terrified that one day she'll hear that hum again.
Story number 2.
A group of divers went missing off the coast of Oregon in July of 2017. It was supposed to be a routine expedition, an old sunken freighter they were going to explore about 3 miles offshore, nothing extraordinary. The water was calm, the sky clear. All 4 divers were experienced, but only one came back. His name was Scott Rayner. He was found clinging to a buoy the next morning, his oxygen tank completely drained, his wetsuit torn like it had been dragged across coral, or something worse. He was conscious, but barely, repeating the same phrase over and over, "Don't follow the lights. Don't follow the lights." The Coast Guard tried to piece together what happened. Scott was in shock. His vitals were stable, but he wouldn't answer direct questions, just mumbled about lights and voices and something opening below them. Now here's what they eventually gathered from his account, though some believe he still wasn't telling the full story. The team descended late in the afternoon. The freighter was resting nearly 120 feet down, rusted and partially collapsed. They were about 25 minutes into the dive, swimming along the outside of the hull, when the lights appeared. Not from their flashlights. These were soft, bluish orbs that moved slowly just outside their peripheral vision. At first, they thought it was bioluminescence. That's common in some areas, but these lights were moving against the current in tight, deliberate patterns, almost like they were circling them. Then came the voices. Scott said he started hearing whispers in his headset, despite no one speaking. It was a language he didn't recognize, sharp, wet syllables that reminded him of something between a hiss and a growl. The other divers heard it too. They all surfaced briefly, while thinking maybe it was interference or a problem with the radios. But the moment they went back under, it started again, louder. The lights drew them deeper, away from the freighter, toward a trench no one had mentioned in the maps. It wasn't supposed to be there. It hadn't shown up on sonar, wasn't documented in any dive log, but it was massive, dark and yawning, like a black mouth in the ocean floor. One by one, the divers started swimming toward it. Not talking, not responding to Scott's commands, just slowly drifting, their limbs slack, their eyes wide behind the masks. He tried to stop them, grabbed one by the arm. Julia, he thought, but she turned and looked at him, and her face wasn't right. Her mask was still on, but her eyes were off, clouded over, like she was looking through him. She opened her mouth. Bubbles rose. Then she smiled. Scott fled. He kicked upward as fast as he could, ignoring the searing pain in his chest and ears from the pressure. He blacked out before he broke the surface. They later found the divers' equipment, tanks, weight belts, even their masks, neatly arranged in a pile on the ocean floor, just outside the trench. There was no sign of their bodies. Scott eventually stopped talking about what happened. Not even his family could get details out of him. He quit diving, moved inland to Arizona, and refused to go near any body of water larger than a bathtub. But here's the creepiest part. A year later, another group of divers explored the same area, not knowing what had happened. The trench was gone, nothing but smooth sand for miles. But one of the divers, while reviewing footage from his GoPro, noticed something strange. In the background, just at the edge of visibility, there was a soft blue light. And a hand, pale and boneless looking, gently reaching up from the sand.
Story number 3.
In the summer of 2009, a family of 4 rented a beachfront cabin along the Outer Banks of North Carolina. The place was small and old, the kind of rental that hadn't been updated since the 80s. Faded wallpaper, dusty board games, and VHS tapes stacked in a corner. But it was cheap, isolated, and had a direct view of the ocean. By the 3rd night, things started getting weird. The youngest daughter, Emily, just 7 years old, began waking up with sand in her bed. At first, the parents thought she was sneaking out at night, maybe playing outside when she wasn't supposed to. But the screen door was always locked from the inside, and her feet were clean. No sand on the floor, just the bed, and only hers. The next night, Emily said she had a new friend who came to visit her window, a boy. She said he wore no shirt, had skin like fish, and whispered things to her, asked her to come with him. Her parents thought she was just being imaginative, too many ghost stories before bed, maybe too much sun. But then Emily's brother, Nate, 11, saw something too. He'd gotten up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and noticed the back door, leading to the beach, was wide open. The screen door, too. He crept outside and swore he saw small, wet footprints leading into the cabin, not away from it. He called for his dad, who came out with a flashlight, but by then the prints had been washed away by the tide or soaked into the sand. The following morning, they found a trail of seaweed leading from the door to the hallway where Emily and Nate's rooms were. Not dry seaweed, fresh, still wet and stinking like it had just been pulled from the ocean. No one could explain it. No tide came that high, no footprints, just that trail and the smell that lingered for hours afterward. They called the rental agency, thinking maybe someone had a key or the place wasn't secure. The agency apologized and offered to send someone to check the locks. But when the repairman showed up, he refused to go inside. He took one look at the back door, looked toward the shore, and muttered, "This is one of those places." When pressed, he wouldn't elaborate, just told them to keep their windows locked and to leave before the next full moon, which was in 3 days. The family tried to laugh it off. They weren't superstitious. But the tension grew. Emily started drawing pictures of the boy who came to her window. The drawings were disturbing, not because of the details, but because of the eyes. The boy's eyes were always huge and black, like an anglerfish. And in every picture, his mouth was open, wide enough to split his jaw, and filled with rows of sharp, uneven teeth. The night before the full moon, the parents set up a camera in Emily's room. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the footage showed her sitting up in bed, staring at the window. Then the blinds lifted on their own. There was no wind, no noise, and in the grainy footage, something slid into the frame. It wasn't a boy. It wasn't even human. It looked like a child at first glance, but its limbs were too long, its fingers webbed, its skin glistening like it had just emerged from something wet and ancient. It pressed its face to the glass, and its jaw started to unhinge, slowly, deliberately, until it was wider than its entire head. Then the footage cut to static. They left that morning. They didn't pack. They didn't argue. They just picked up their kids, got in the car, and drove. The cabin sat abandoned after that. Locals say no one stays there more than a night now. Sometimes when the tide's low and the moon is full, people walking along the beach swear they see small, wet footprints leading away from the water and stopping at the edge of the cabin porch.
Story number 4.
In 2013, a group of college students rented a cheap Airbnb on a remote stretch of the California coast for spring break. It was a single-story beach house built in the 60s, sitting just 50 feet from the water, surrounded by cliffs and seagrass. It was the kind of place where the ocean sounded like it was breathing, loud, steady, and alive. They arrived on a Wednesday. 5 of them: Jordan, Lacey, Ty, Rebecca, and Miles. The first night was uneventful. They drank, listened to music, watched the waves crash under a full moon. But on the second night, something started to feel off. It began with the tide. At around 2 a.m., Ty noticed that the water had come in way too far. It was licking the bottom steps of the porch, which was strange because the tide chart they had showed low tide for hours to come. The moon was still out, but the water looked wrong, too dark, like it was full of ink, and completely still despite the wind. No waves, no foam, just this vast, flat, black sheet. They went to bed uneasy. Then the scratching started. Rebecca was the first to hear it, something dragging across the underside of the floorboards. Not animals, not wind. This was rhythmic, deliberate, like nails or claws. She woke Jordan, who listened and confirmed it. They woke the others. They all stood in the living room, listening to the slow, heavy scraping just beneath their feet. Miles, half drunk and trying to be brave, opened the back door and shined a flashlight under the house. Nothing, just sand and darkness. The sound stopped. For a moment, then it started again, this time directly under the bedroom walls. Louder, closer. They packed up to leave, but the car wouldn't start. Dead battery, no cell service. They were stuck for the night. Around 4 a.m., Lacey started screaming from the bathroom. They ran in and found her on the floor, pointing to the mirror. Written across the foggy glass were the words, "You brought it back." No one had touched the mirror. No one had even taken a shower. The sink wasn't even running. The rest of the night was a blur of panic, They barricaded themselves in the living room. Rebecca was crying. Jordan was trying to break the lockbox to find the emergency key for the shed outside. Miles kept pacing, mumbling something about not looking at the water. Over and over, "Don't look at the water, don't look at the water." Just before sunrise, they heard something walking across the roof. Not crawling, walking, slow, heavy, two-legged footsteps. It stopped directly above them and stayed there for nearly 10 minutes. When morning finally came, the water had receded like nothing had happened. The car started again without a problem. They left everything behind: bags, food, wallets, just drove. 2 days later, Ty called the Airbnb owner to explain and apologize. The owner was confused, said the house hadn't been rented in over a year, claimed the listing had been deactivated since a previous group had gone missing there the year before. The account had apparently been hacked to relist the property. No one knew by who. But here's the worst part. Jordan, the most level-headed of the group, started sleepwalking after that trip. Every few weeks he'd wake up outside, barefoot and freezing, always facing west, always toward the ocean.
Story number 5.
In 2015, a marine biology grad student named Erica took a summer research job cataloging sea life along a rarely accessed shoreline near the southern coast of Alaska. It was a solo assignment, funded by a quiet university grant, studying tidal pools in a region known as Deadman's Inlet. The place had a grim reputation among locals, stories about boats vanishing and strange animal carcasses washing ashore. But Erica didn't believe in that stuff. She believed in data, not ghost stories. The site was isolated, no cell service, no neighbors, and a 40-minute boat ride from the nearest fishing village. She stayed in a tiny cabin overlooking a rocky beach, the kind where the wind never stopped and the trees bent permanently inland. Her first week was uneventful. She documented mollusks, sea stars, odd jellyfish. But on the 8th day, she found something in one of the deeper pools that she couldn't identify. It was small, maybe the size of a baby's hand, translucent, with a tiny human-like face and long, trailing fins. When she touched it, it recoiled violently and disappeared into a crack between the rocks. She thought maybe it was a malformed fish or some deep-sea juvenile species pulled up by a storm. That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind had stopped for the first time since she'd arrived, and the silence was suffocating. Around 2 a.m., she heard a soft tapping on the side of the cabin. Not on the door, on the walls, around the whole structure, like small fingers brushing against the wood. She stepped outside with a flashlight, but the beach was empty. No animals, no wind, just stillness. She turned to go back in and froze. There were footprints in the sand, dozens of them, tiny, webbed, and leading in a circle around the cabin. She told herself it was just seabirds, maybe otters. She'd document them tomorrow. But the next morning, the prints were gone, completely erased, except for one inside the cabin in the middle of the floor. A single, wet, webbed print. No sign of entry. The doors were locked, the windows shut. Erica started recording everything after that. Audio logs, video clips. She emailed her professor but never got a reply. On her last audio log, she sounded exhausted, barely whispering. "They watch at night. I saw their eyes under the rocks. They're getting closer." 2 days later, a supply boat arrived to check on her. The cabin door was wide open. The place was trashed, equipment shattered, papers torn. The walls were covered in long, vertical claw marks. The cameras were smashed. Her boots were still by the door. Her sleeping bag was neatly rolled. But Erica was gone. The only thing they found was a series of drawings she'd made, tucked into a waterproof notebook. The last page showed dozens of pale, human-like figures crawling out of the sea, eyes black, jaws unhinged, with the note, "They are not fish. They were never fish." Erica was never found. But weeks later, a fishing crew reported something strange a few miles offshore. A lone figure standing on a reef at low tide, still as stone, watching the boat. Pale, hairless, barefoot. When they got closer, it slipped silently into the water and disappeared.
Story number 6.
In 2021, a travel vlogger named Cassie went missing while documenting a solo trip along the lesser-known beaches of Maine. She had a modest following online and was known for seeking out forgotten places, often exploring abandoned towns, hidden trails, and secluded stretches of coast. Her last upload was titled "The Beach with No Name," and it was unlike anything her subscribers had seen before. The video began like most of her others, bright, cheerful, full of drone shots and voiceover commentary. She said she found the beach by accident after speaking with a quiet old man at a gas station in a nearly deserted fishing village. He told her about a place the maps forgot, a stretch of coastline hidden down a narrow road with no signs and no name. He warned her too, if the tide's out when you get there, don't stay long. You don't want to be there when it comes back. She laughed it off in the video, thinking it was local superstition, and went anyway. The beach was beautiful, massive, jagged rocks like broken teeth jutting from the sand, tide pools scattered like mirrors, and silence. Not a single bird, not even the sound of waves. The tide was unusually far out, exposing things she said she'd never seen before. Bones, not fish bones, larger, long, some shaped like fingers. She found a cave near the cliffs and filmed herself walking inside. That's when the footage changed. The camera was shaky now. Her breathing was faster. She said she heard something moving deeper in the cave, wet, dragging sounds. At one point, she panned the camera and caught something in the dark, a figure crouched in the shadows, pale and thin, with limbs too long for its body. Its head tilted slowly, following her. Then the footage cut. When the video resumed, Cassie was outside, running. She kept glancing back at the rocks. Her face was different, panicked, wide-eyed. She was whispering, barely holding the camera straight. "They're not people," she said. "They come out when the tide returns. They smell the air. They remember you." The final few seconds of the video were strange. The camera had fallen sideways into the sand. You could see her running in the distance, heading for her car. Behind her, along the rocks, several tall, thin figures were emerging, crawling upright, slowly. Their skin glistened like wet stone, and they didn't move like anything natural. The screen went black. The video ended with white text, uploaded automatically by scheduled post. Cassie never returned home. Her car was later found on the road where she said it would be. Keys still in the ignition, doors locked, camera gone. Local police launched a small search, but no one would go near the beach. When asked why, one old fisherman told reporters, "That beach doesn't stay in one place. It shows up when it wants someone." And then he said something no one could forget. "It's not the ocean you should be afraid of. It's what remembers it used to be land."
Story number 7.
In 2006, a newlywed couple named Rachel and Mark decided to spend their honeymoon on a quiet coastal stretch in northern Washington. They'd booked a small beachfront cabin that was once used by lighthouse keepers, tucked away from the main roads and only accessible by a winding, forested path. It was the kind of place where the fog never quite lifted, and the waves always seemed just a bit too loud at night. The cabin was rustic, with creaky floorboards and a fireplace that hadn't seen use in decades. On their second night there, Rachel found a strange journal wedged behind a loose stone in the fireplace. It was water damaged and written in shaky cursive, its entries dating back to the 1940s. The first few pages were mundane: weather reports, lighthouse logs, notes about keeping ships safe from the rocky coastline. But around the halfway point, the tone changed. The writer, who never signed a name, began mentioning the man in the surf. According to the journal, each night at low tide, a figure would emerge from the waves and stand just beyond the edge of the beach watching the cabin, never approaching, never moving, just standing there. The entries grew more frantic as time went on. The writer claimed the man would get closer each night, always timed with the lowest tide. Until one night he left wet footprints on the front porch. Rachel showed the journal to Mark, and they both assumed it was a prank, some forgotten horror story tucked away by a bored teenager or a previous guest trying to scare the next visitor. That night, they heard something strange. It was around 2:30 a.m. Rachel woke to the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps on the deck outside. Not quick, not panicked, slow, as if someone were pacing. When she peeked through the curtain, she saw no one. But the footprints were there. Fresh, wet, leading from the edge of the beach straight to their front door, and then back again. Mark stepped out with a flashlight, trying to catch whoever was messing with them. He walked the length of the beach and returned 20 minutes later, pale and silent. Rachel asked what he saw. He just shook his head and whispered, "There were no footprints coming back." The next day, they drove into the nearest town to ask about the cabin. The shopkeeper went quiet when they mentioned the location and asked if they'd been there long. "You're staying at the old watch station?" he said. "That place has been empty for years. Most don't last more than 2 nights." He told them the original lighthouse keeper vanished sometime in 1949. His wife found the cabin door open, his boots still by the bed, and the journal on the floor. No sign of a struggle, just a line scratched into the wooden wall beside the fireplace. "He waits at the waterline." Rachel and Mark returned to the cabin that evening with plans to leave first thing in the morning. But that night, as the tide pulled out and the fog rolled in, the sound of footsteps returned. This time, they didn't stop at the porch. Rachel was woken by the creak of the floorboards just outside the bedroom door. They found the front door wide open in the morning. Mark was gone. There were no signs of a break-in, no signs of a struggle, just a trail of wet footprints that led from the bed to the shore and stopped at the edge of the sea. Rachel never stayed near the ocean again. She claims she sometimes hears those same footsteps when she's alone at night, even hundreds of miles inland, always when the tide is lowest, always during fog. And she started marking the floors of every place she lives with salt, because she knows he doesn't stop at the waterline anymore.
Story number 8.
In 2018, a group of 5 friends went night swimming on a beach in Florida that was technically closed to the public. It wasn't a wild party, just a quiet reunion of childhood friends who hadn't seen each other in years. The beach was near a shuttered marine research station, all chain-link fences and no trespassing signs that had long been rusted over. The locals called the area Hollow Shore, not because of the way the wind moved through the dunes, but because of what they said lived underneath. The night was clear, moonlit, warm. The tide was low, revealing long stretches of flat, wet sand, the kind that seems to go on forever when you're standing in the middle of it. They joked around, splashing each other, wading deeper. At one point, Alex, the quietest of the group, noticed a black circle forming in the sand a few feet from him, about the size of a dinner plate. Then another, and another. They were perfect holes, deep and smooth, forming in total silence, like something was pushing up from beneath. He called out to the others. Everyone gathered around one of the holes, trying to figure out what could cause it. They poked it with a stick, dropped in a rock. No splash, just darkness. Then a sound so faint you could almost miss it. Breathing. Wet. Shallow. Close. Suddenly, one of the holes collapsed inward and something surged upward, so fast no one really saw it. Just a blur, a scream. Then Mia was gone. No splash, no struggle, just gone. Panic erupted. They ran for shore, but the sand had changed. It was sucking at their feet. Not like quicksand, more like something alive was pulling down. By the time they reached dry land, they were missing 2 more, Caleb and Jenna, swallowed by those impossible holes. There was no noise, no violence, just absence. Alex and Lauren were the only ones left. They went to the police, told them everything. The cops dismissed it, said they'd probably gone swimming drunk and got caught in a rip current. But no bodies were ever recovered. No belongings, not even clothes or towels. The beach remained sealed off. No investigation. Alex started digging into the history of the old Marine Research Station. It had been shut down in the 90s after several unexplained disappearances of staff members. Most of the reports were buried, classified, or missing. But one internal memo survived in a digital archive. It read, "Tunnel systems beneath the sand are active again. Subjects display coordinated movement. Avoid during low tide." 2 months later, Lauren went missing from her apartment. Door locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. Her bathtub was filled with wet sand. Alex hasn't gone near the coast since. But once a year, on the anniversary of that night, he says he finds new sand tracked into his home. Always damp. Always smelling faintly of salt and breath.
Story number 9.
In 2010, an amateur photographer named Dylan set out to document abandoned locations along the eastern seaboard, focusing on areas where nature had begun reclaiming man-made structures. He was particularly fascinated by a forgotten beach resort in South Carolina, a place called Shoreglass Cove, which had been destroyed by a hurricane in the late 70s and never rebuilt. There were no roads leading directly to it anymore. Dylan hiked in alone carrying nothing but a backpack, his camera gear, and a GPS tracker. The beach itself was stunning, completely untouched, with rusted playground equipment half buried in dunes and shattered hotel walls peeking out of the sand like ancient ruins. Everything was quiet, except for the waves and the distant creak of metal swaying in the wind. It was perfect for the kind of haunting, atmospheric shots he was known for. He set up camp near what remained of the old pool house and started shooting at golden hour. That's when he noticed something strange. In one of the photos he took of the beach, there was a figure standing at the shoreline. Not walking, not moving, just standing there, tall, blurry, and wrong. Dylan hadn't seen anyone else the entire day. He was sure he was alone. He chalked it up to lens flare or a shadow. But as the sun went down, the unease began to set in. At around 2 a.m., Dylan was woken by the sound of a metal chain dragging along the concrete. He grabbed his flashlight and peeked out of his tent. The air felt heavier, dense like the air before a storm. He walked toward the old pool, which was nothing more than a hollow pit filled with brackish water and sand. That's when he saw the footprints. Not his, too large, bare, wet, leading from the pool directly to his tent and then back again. He turned back, heart pounding, only to find that the tent flap had been unzipped from the inside. He packed up and left at sunrise, but the GPS tracker began acting erratically. It would spin, lose signal, reappear, then claim he was still standing at Shoreglass Cove, even when he was already miles into the forest. Back home, Dylan began going through the photos from that night. In every picture taken after sunset, the same figure appeared, closer each time. First at the shoreline, then by the dunes, then behind one of the crumbling hotel pillars. The final image was taken accidentally, blurry and crooked, but it showed the inside of his tent and someone else's arm reaching toward his sleeping bag. He never returned to Shoreglass, but his photos of that trip still circulate online, usually in horror forums and urban legend threads. No one can agree on what the figure is. Some say it's a spirit of the hurricane victims. Others believe the land was cursed by a local tribe long before the resort was built. But there's a detail most people miss. If you look closely at the final picture, brighten it just right, you can see the face of the figure. It's smiling, and it looks exactly like Dylan.